In this video, I want to talk about how you can use backup to ensure that you are keeping copies of your files, important files like your photographs or your schoolwork, and you can store them in different locations, for example, on the cloud or on local devices. So we'll just look at that, what we mean by the cloud and what we mean by local storage as well. So everything digital, including your photos, videos, music, and schoolwork, all needs to be stored somewhere. So that can either be locally on the device you're on or on the internet on the cloud. When we talk about local storage, what we mean is storage that physically exists on your device, and that can include things like the internal storage and SD cards on your mobile phones or tablets, or the drives that you have on your laptops, PCs, and games consoles. Cloud storage refers to storing your files online using the internet, and examples can include iCloud, OneDrive, Google Drive. I'm sure one or more of those you've come across before. When we talk about the cloud, what we're referring to is that as a network of computers, specifically servers, that store the data in data centers, and this is where your files are stored. So when you're watching videos or listening to music on the internet and you're streaming that, you're accessing the cloud where those files are stored. When you're uploading media, such as pictures or videos to social media, then you are storing those somewhere on the cloud. I suppose the question arises then is, do you want to store your files locally or do you want to store them on the cloud? So what I'm going to do now is just talk about each of those and look at just the advantages and disadvantages of each of those methods of storage. So local storage works without internet connection, whereas cloud storage does not. Often with cloud storage, you need to have a really good internet connection, especially if you have lots of files or if you have big files as well. On the cloud, you can access your schoolwork and photos anywhere, including from home or in school, using any device, either your mobile phone, tablet, or computer over the internet. This is useful now because many of us have lots of devices, so being able to access the same files across those different devices is really helpful. When your files are stored locally, you can only access them on the device on which you have stored them. To be able to access them elsewhere, you need to then copy and send those files to wherever you need to send them to. So you actually have to make physical copies of the files, as opposed to on the cloud, you've got this same copy and you're able to view that same copy on, on the multiple devices. When your files are stored locally, you know exactly where they are. You know exactly that they're on this device and you know where that device is. But when files are on the cloud, they are stored remotely and you really have no idea in the world where they are. The benefit of the cloud is that it allows you to share files and collaborate with others. For example, you can share your work with your teacher through Teams, and then your teacher can then give you feedback on that same document, and then you can respond to that feedback. Or you could be working as a group of friends together on a project as well. So that way you can share the documents, which makes it a good way of working. On the cloud, though, while the data are encrypted and in principle no one else can really access them, cloud companies have access to your data, and there might be some privacy issues around that, especially as in the past they've often shown themselves not to be completely trustworthy with the use of our data, some of these big tech companies. So that's something just to bear in mind. One of the issues with cloud storage as well is it's often normally limited in size and how much you have, unless you are prepared to pay a subscription for more storage. This isn't particularly expensive, but just to give you just be aware of the fact that if you want more storage, you have to pay for it. With local storage, the problem with this is that if the device on which the data is stored gets damaged or stolen, your files could be lost and irretrievably lost. So that is, you'll never see them again. But as long as you have an internet connection and you've got your files stored on the cloud, then in principle, you should be able to access those files always. Additionally, for a locally stored file, you can be sure that you are accessing the most up-to-date version of that file. Sometimes, when you've saved something to the cloud, you might not be able to access that file immediately from another device. And that's because there might be some delay in the way syncing works. So with syncing, you have to ensure that all the devices are accessing that same file. And if you've modified a file, you need to make sure that they're accessing that most recent version of that file as well. So if your files aren't properly synced, they might be accessing different versions of the same file, which can be quite confusing. But syncing does happen automatically and happens in the background. But sometimes, and this is the issue, is that sometimes the files don't sync automatically, especially again, if those files are quite large and you might have lots of files as well. And that just takes time for that process to take place. So just be mindful of that if you are modifying a file, and if you're viewing a file and you can see that you've made changes but it doesn't look like they've been made on another device, just have to be aware that it's because syncing hasn't completed the process. I suppose it's a bit of a misnomer of a proposition to say that it's local versus cloud. That's not really how we should be thinking. We should be thinking actually they're both really good. We should really use both. They're both really good, but they also have their drawbacks, as we've talked about. What we can do is we can use both to ensure that we have backups of our files. So that is to say, we have the same copies of our files stored both on the cloud and locally. So if there's a problem with either of those, our local drives, or an issue not being able to access our files on the cloud for whatever reason, then at least we're still able to access them somehow. So for example, your photos on your mobile phone can also be installed and stored on the cloud. So it's just something really to think about here. So when we especially with things like photos and schoolwork. So with photos, they're really precious, right? They're one of a kind. They are more than just a file to you. They mean a lot to you, perhaps less to other people, but they certainly mean a lot to you and to your family. It holds your memories. Your schoolwork is more than just the work that you've done. It takes time to produce schoolwork. It takes effort, often sweat, often tears go into that piece of work. And you really don't want to lose that work and then have to redo it, because that's just not a nice position to be in. So don't risk losing your data. The advice I'm giving you is to use both local and cloud storage and really make backup a habit. So what I want you to do now is to really just discuss the ways in which you are going to ensure that your precious photos, your important schoolwork, and any other files that you have can't be lost. So what's going to be your process? Specifically talk about what online platforms you want to be using, what cloud platforms you want to be using, explore how you're going to be backing up your files from your phone, and just have a discussion with your neighbor. It could be that you're already doing these things, in which case that's fantastic. But if you are doing that, then maybe you can share that with your neighbors. Thank you very much.